Hi again then guys, and welcome to yet another look back into the past of the Forza franchise, to Forza Motorsport 3. Again, a game which, as I've mentioned before, doesn't have quite as many unique cars as some of the other Forza games, but at the same time, this is, you could say, the end of the line for a lot of cool cars which were featured on the previous games, be it Forza 1 or Forza 2, and this is another such occasion. It's a car which, to be completely transparent, is not one that I love. I've never loved the MR2 of this particular generation in any form, be it aftermarket or the original, and I think that seems to be the case for a lot of MR2 fans. I'm sure that this generation does have its super fans, but you've got to admit it's no way near as raw as the previous two. What I would call the mini F355 generation, which of course had the GTS form, came with crazy stuff like roof scoops, asymmetrical scoops at the back, which I personally love the look of. It's a great little performance car, and it punches well above its weight. Even the Bossie original with the supercharger, you can make that into a pretty brutal little track car. Now this one can be made into that if you want to, but that's the question. Would you want to? Because it's not really the same kind of car anymore. It's almost like what happened with another Toyota, the Celica, when it became the ZZT231 and front-wheel drive came in and it stopped being anywhere near as cool. Now again, that car has its fans. I used to love that final generation of the Celica, but it doesn't compare. In terms of performance, it's nothing compared to the ST165 and especially the ST185 and 205. Those are legitimately iconic JDM cars, and especially in the rally world. Now with the MR2 that's not really the case. It's much more of a pure sports car than a full-on motorsport machine. Not that it can't be, but most people who love it tend to love it for the road versions. This one though, it's a lot more neutered compared to the others. It's smaller, it's cuter, it's less gnarly, nowhere near as aggressive, and nowhere near as competitive either. But what about this one? Because this of course is an aftermarket version tuned by, you could definitely say, a pretty legendary aftermarket company, Tonne's. Tonne's has made a number of great aftermarket versions of Toyotas, including the Chaser and the Supra and various others. So what could they do for this one, called the W123? This is a dirt cheap car. It's only 15 grand on Forza 3, which, as I said, is dirt cheap. It really is. That would be cheap for a normal MR2, let alone an aftermarket one. So what do you get for that? Well, the category is still very low. It's not a crazy aftermarket tune like a Top Secret or a HKS or a Blitz or anything like that. It's still only in the D category, 340 Pi. But that could be useful, because some slower or less powerful aftermarket cars can really come in handy. Even something like the Tomicara M20B Impreza, which we talked about recently on the channel from Forza 2, has its uses. It was a very useful car because it didn't have 700, 800, 900 horsepower and make it ineligible because of being too fast. So could that be the case here? Well, consider the rest of what you get. It's mid-engine, of course, rear-wheel drive, 1.8 engine, and it is tuned, but it's tuned more to the kind of level that you'd expect from, say, a DC2 Integra Type R, for instance, 187 horsepower and a pretty impressive, actually, 185 pound-feet of torque. It's pretty light, as you'd assume, only 980 kilos, which of course is less than a metric ton, and consequently the horsepower per ton is actually higher than the power, due to the low weight. 191 horsepower per ton isn't bad, especially not for such a low-category vehicle, but when you actually drive the car, it's certainly not bad. The handling is very good. In fact, it's very nimble. The fact that the car feels more compact than any of the other MR2s certainly helps. It carries its weight very low. It's very beginner friendly, and it's such a low class with a low price that it pretty much is a perfect entry point for beginners into the aftermarket world. It's so easy to drive. It's a pleasure to work with to some degree, but at the same time, it's not quite there for me in the way that something like the aforementioned Tomicara Subaru is, because that one is more beginner-friendly than a lot of other aftermarket cars, but at the same time, that one has more than enough performance for you to grow into. So it's good for beginners, but then as you become a pro, you can still use the car to win a ton of events. With this one, that doesn't really feel like it's the case. Now, of course, you can upgrade it, just like you could on previous Forza games, but still, it just doesn't feel like that caliber of car. If you, instead of this, took something like another Tom's actually, TO20 MR2, which is the previous generation, that's a far more powerful car, it's a higher class, and it's also cheaper. And though it's not better in every way, it's also a heavier car, but still, a car like that, because of the fact that it already has over 250 horsepower to work with, you can take it far higher, it's just innately more useful. Now, again, you can tune this one up, and I'm not saying at all that this is a bad car, it feels like a strange one to me, I think. In summary, to take an overview of the car for me, personally at least, it's a car which feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be. The looks would indicate it's this crazy, radical version of the MR2. Certainly. The looks divide opinion. It has a full-on livery, not just a bunch of decals, which again attracts even more attention to it. But then the specs don't really back up the look of the car. This looks like something that would have at least 250 horsepower, maybe even 300, who knows, maybe even more. And it can cope with that. That's the thing. They could have easily given it far more power, but for whatever reasons, they chose not to. Now, is it a well set up machine? In its own way, yeah. It's sprightly. I'd call it a thumpy car, for sure. It's got a lot of attitude. But at the same time, that doesn't make it the best thing around. The TO20, I would say, is a better option of aftermarket MR2, so if you are going to go for one, you'd be better off going for that one. If you like this generation specifically, and you like the way it looks, then give it a try. But for most people, you could give this one a miss. It's one of the relatively few aftermarket cars which I wouldn't recommend not buying, for sure, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend buying it either. You could very much so take it or leave it. If you like it, I'm certainly happy for you, but I wouldn't be surprised if you find it a little underwhelming as well. That's personally the case for me. But that's it for this pick, of course. I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.